right. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for getting up on the early side to see this is like one of the first talks of the day. So thank you very much. Super appreciated. If you have trouble seeing the slides, there is a link here to the slides on Speaker Deck. So feel free to download those. My name is Matt McKenna. I work at a digital health startup in San Francisco called Omada Health. We do a little bit of Ember in some of our internal apps. And I'm really excited to give this talk, which is called Build a Game in Ember Starring Your Cat. And there will be a demo of a game starring my cat, Croissant, in a little bit. But the reason I'm excited to give this talk is because I think it's already pretty well established that Ember is a fantastic choice if you're building what you might call like a fancy CRUD app built in JavaScript. And that's true. If you're building an app that's hitting a REST API and doing like CRUD operations, then Ember is a really good choice. But I think Ember is more versatile than that. In fact, I think Ember is a fantastic choice for building any front-end JavaScript application, even one as non-standard as a game starring your cat. So that is the takeaway that I hope to bring to this talk, is that there are things that are common to all JavaScript apps. And these things are generally not the most exciting parts of JavaScript app development. In fact, I think they're kind of the boring parts. And I think if we let Ember handle the boring parts of app development, then we will be able to spend more time doing the fun stuff, the exciting stuff of app development, like making your cat jump around the screen. So if you're here, maybe your first thought is why build a game in JavaScript? Like, if you want to make a game, why JavaScript? Or maybe you take it from the other angle and you say, I'm going to make something in JavaScript, so why a game? And for me, that's pretty straightforward. So I got into computers because I was into games. And then I got into programming because I was into computers. So now that programming is part of my career, I really wanted to cross it off my bucket list, go back and make the thing that got me really excited about programming in the first place. And then next, if you do Ember, or even if you don't do Ember, but you do a little bit of JavaScript, you already know enough to start making a game right now. There's very little between you and just making a fun little game. And kind of along those lines, deploying your game is relatively easy, especially compared to mobile app development and what it takes to publish an app onto an app store. And then once you do deploy your game will have a really wide footprint because your game can be played on mobile, tablet, desktop. And so there's just, I think, a lot of good reasons to get your feet wet making games in JavaScript. And perhaps most importantly, right there on the right is a picture of Croissant. She's a fluffy little cat, enjoys sleeping, food, and I think she likes being a star of this game. So that's why you might want to build a game in JavaScript. But why build a game in Ember? How does Ember enter this? You might make a game in JavaScript, but how does Ember relate to this? And I think to kind of appreciate why Ember can be useful in game development, it's important to distinguish between two things. One, you, and two, your JavaScript app. And so what I mean by that is you are special. And if you grew up kind of near where I did, kind of when I did, maybe you saw Mr. Rogers on TV, and he had a song called You Are Special. These are the lyrics to it. And they're really nice. You are special. You are unique. That's what makes you wonderful. I agree with that. I think you are unique. That is what makes you wonderful. Your JavaScript app, though. Your JavaScript app is probably less special than you are. There are things that, even if your app feels like it's super unique, that no one has ever made this app before, there are things that your JavaScript app is probably going to need to do. So this chart here is a list of things on the left that your JavaScript app probably needs. And the list of things on the right is the patterns or objects that Ember uses to attack these things your app needs. And why I have this slide is to show that you may feel constrained by a framework. Like you don't want to do everything the framework's way. But the framework is actually helping you take care of the boring parts of app development. So like those things on the left, like handling the asset pipeline or doing testing, these aren't things that people get really excited about. Like when I decided I wanted to make a game, I wasn't like, I want to make a game and I'm really excited about doing the asset pipeline. It was like, I just wanted the asset pipeline to be there so I could work on the game. And so this reminds me of a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt. And I may not have the quote exactly right, but how it goes is, with freedom comes maintenance. And I think what Eleanor meant here was that, of course, you have the freedom to choose any JavaScript design pattern. And of course, you have the freedom to choose any micro library you want to get your JavaScript app developed. But now, if you do decide to take these disparate libraries and patterns and glue them all together to make your app, you are now on the hook to maintain that glue code. And I think the question, that I had asked when I decided I want to make a game was, how bad did I want to maintain that glue code? Like, how much time did I want to spend working on the glue code compared to working on the game itself? So that brings me to the boring parts of game development. I'm not a professional game developer. I imagine professional game development has its own set of boring parts. But for me making this game starring Croissant, there were three main things that I wasn't super jazzed to work on, that I wanted the framework to help me out. And the first thing was the non-game UI. So I knew that I needed menus in my game. I needed ways to like pause the game. I needed ways to turn the audio on and off. I needed ways to show high scores. I needed these things, but that's not why I wanted to make the game. I just knew I needed them. Next was testing. I knew I wanted to test my game. I wanted to do everything on the up and up, but I didn't want to have to configure a testing framework. I've configured a number of testing frameworks in my day, and I've yet to have a good time doing it. So I was really hopeful that I wouldn't have to worry too much about setting up my tests, so I could write them pretty easily and quickly. And finally, there was deploying. So I knew I wanted to deploy to the web so you could play the game in the web browser. And then I thought, well, this is a game. I play games on my phone. I would also like to have this game be on the App Store. And then I got into the games that I got into when I was a kid were all desktop games. So part of me really wanted to get a desktop app also. But I didn't want to have to become an expert in all these systems that I was going to deploy to. I just wanted the game to be on them. So this sort of makes up the structure of the rest of the talk, is that we'll go through how I used Ember to handle these three boring parts: the UI, the testing, and deploying the game. So this is a screenshot of the game. The screenshot's on the right. That's an actual picture of Croissant on the left. I think like a good third of my pictures of Croissant are her in an Amazon.com box. I don't know if maybe it's the way it is with your cats too, but they love deliveries from Amazon. So we'll go into how the game works in a little bit, but kind of long story short, it's written in Canvas. And here are some links to, if you want to play now, you can go to croissantthepizzacat.com. Warning, there's like audio, so it could be kind of fun. The link on the bottom is to the source code, so if you're interested in seeing that. So now, if you will permit me, I will switch to the game. So this is it. This is the main menu. I don't know if you can see the URL up top, but it's just / we're at the root URL. If I hit play here, Croissant, the game starts, and I press, so I just lost because I'm terrible. I am supposed to be the preeminent Croissant the Pizza Cat player in the world. That was super embarrassing. So here's the idea. You press space, you jump, you get the pizzas. You avoid the cat beds. And that's how you lose, is if you fall into a cat bed. Because I wanted to make a game starring my cat Croissant, but I didn't want it when you lose to have anything bad happen to you. So, yeah, so and if you have your audio on, there's like a slight purr when she's in there. Because this is like my favorite game over. It's like, oh, take a nap. So that's kind of like the main game mechanics. There's a couple other parts I want to show. So I collected 71 pizzas. Then my high score is now 71. And if I click the croissant face here, we go into... no, that's okay. Thank you very much, though. So if you hit the menu button, you go into play/1/menu. And then if you go into the high scores, you'll see here are some of my high scores. The one that I just got, that 71, is right there. And then I can go back to play. And one more part I wanted to show was that if you're playing and you hit the menu, the game pauses. So this is, in general, just like how the game works. It's not crazy complicated or anything. So I want to get started talking about how the game menus work. So I wanted to make menus that didn't feel, like a website. I wanted to feel kind of like a game. And so for me, like, when I was thinking about what does a game menu look like, the kind of two main things. One, game menus, at least in my memory, are full screen, so they take up the whole screen. And then the second part is that they animate, so like a more nested, the more nested you go, the more like animated in one direction, and when you go unnested, you animate in another direction. So I wanted to try to get something that felt like that out of Ember. And fortunately, like standard Ember, you're already halfway there. So if you've built some Ember, you're probably used to nested routes. And if you're new to Ember, maybe you haven't seen this, but I think it's not too hard to pick up like how this works. So on the far left is our root URL, and that's just slash. And when you click play, you go to /play/1, so for level 1. And then if you click on the croissant face, you go into the menu, and it's /menu, and so forth. And the code snippet on the bottom is what the router.js file looks like. So that's how we define our routes. And maybe you're thinking, like, why even show this slide? This is totally standard Ember. But that's exactly, I think, the point, is that you get this sort of functionality from Ember just right out of the box. Like, you're kind of halfway there to making a game menu. So this will get you nested menus, but it won't get you the animated full screen menus that I had talked about before. So how do we do that? I want to take then a step back to talk about how templates are rendered in Ember by default. So it's a mouthful in English, but like in practice, it's a lot easier. So see if I can get this right. In Ember, templates are rendered. I'm reading it off the screen, so I don't even have to memorize it. But in Ember, templates are rendered into the parent route's templates outlet, which is like impossible to parse in English, I think. But in practice, it's not too hard. So it's like your nested template gets rendered into its parent templates outlet. And if you do this, you'll get nested menus. However, it won't be animated in full screen. To do that, that's what these next two slides are about. So the first thing is Liquid Fire. So it's an add-on for Ember. If you were at some of the talks yesterday, you might have heard it mentioned if you aren't already familiar with it. But what it is it's a fantastic add-on for animating between routes in Ember. And what's really cool about it is to configure it, there's not much work you have to do. So in the previous slide, we saw that there was the outlet, which the template gets rendered into. After you install Liquid Fire, the way you can tell an outlet to be animated is by changing your outlet into a liquid outlet. Like, it's kind of that simple. And if you want to make something full screen, or if you want to change how that animation looks, you can give your outlet a class that does the full screen stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about the CSS below, but that's the CSS that makes the game menus be full screen. And then finally, if you've used Liquid Fire before, you've probably seen the transitions.js. And what this does, if you're not familiar, is this is how you tell Liquid Fire what animations you want to use when you transition between one route and another route. So what this code snippet says, somebody's playing, I love it. What this is saying is that if you're in the index, the main index route, and you go into a nested one to move left, and if you go the other way, to go right. And what I just love about Ember and Liquid Fire is that I was able to go from like a standard website-looking nested menus to something that felt like a game in like less than 20 lines of code, or maybe like 30 lines of code. And I didn't feel like I was fighting the framework. I felt like I was using it correctly, which like if you're used to using frameworks, it feels good when you feel like you're working like together with it. So the next part is pausing the game. So we saw that when you went into the menu, the game paused. And so I think that brings up, like, how do you handle the communication between the game written in Canvas and the menus written in Ember? And this might be a part where you're like, yeah, there's like no good way to do that. Why did you pick Ember? You made a bad choice. But fortunately, Ember exposes just like kind of all the right things to make this not super difficult. So to talk about like how we do the playing and the pausing, I got to take two kind of digressions into how the game works. And the first one is the game loop. So the game loop is something that just about every game will have. And it has two main things it needs to do. So it'll run forever, and it will, one, update the positions of the sprites on the screen, so like where Croissant is, where the pizzas are, where the cat beds are. And then two, it will draw those sprites to the screen. And so if you can see that code snippet here, you'll see update and draw. You can kind of guess what those things do. And perhaps you're not familiar with the first line in there, which is window.requestAnimation frame. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll talk about it in the next slide. But what it does is it takes the game loop the game loop function in as a parameter. So let's talk a little bit about requestAnimation frame, which is like the second of the two digressions. So requestAnimation frame is a web API. Supported in most modern browsers now. You kind of don't have to worry about compatibility there. And its main job is to call the callback function, in our case, the game loop, whenever the browser is ready to repaint. And the browser is going to try to repaint 60 times a second. If things get slow, it might not be able to do 60 times a second, but it's going to try. You may be thinking, like if you haven't seen requestAnimation frame before, but you've used to some JavaScript, like you could already do this with setInterval. You could use window.setInterval and have it fire 60 times a second. And you could do that, totally work, and it's fine. And that's the way games were done in the browser like a little bit ago. But there's some like performance reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, having to do with like the smoothness of animation, and also like CPU usage when your tabs in the background. There's a link on the slide here if you want to get a little bit into the details of why requestAnimation frame is like sort of the best practice for making games in JavaScript. But then having like talked a little bit about like how the game works and like how the loop works, the next part is, well, where do we put this game logic? Because we want the game to maintain its state when it's in any route. So we don't want the game to reset, for example, when you go into the menu. So like where do we put this code? Where should it live? And fortunately here, Ember has a type of object that really suits our needs, and it's a service. So if you haven't used services in Ember before, what they are long-lived JavaScript objects that can maintain state between routes. So this is a good spot to put our game logic so it'll survive so its state will survive as we go in between routes. So this is where I'm suggesting we put our play and pause methods. So here is a snippet from the game service. You may recognize the first chunk of code as the game loop that we looked at earlier. And then there's two more methods. There's a play method and a pause method. So the play method sets pause to false. It runs the game loop and adds the event listeners, which is like pressing spacebar. The pause method does just the opposite. Sets pause to true, cancels the animation, essentially pausing the game, and removing those event listeners. So all right, we have our game loop, we have our play and pause method. Now how do we tell Ember that we want to play when we're not in the menu and we want to pause when we are in the menu? Well, this is another area where Ember was like designed in such a way that really helps us out. So we can inject the game service into our menu route and take advantage of two events that happen on the route. The two events are activate and deactivate. So the activate event will happen when we go into the route. The deactivate event will happen when we leave the route. So what you're seeing on this slide is that we call pause on the game service on activate, and we call play on the game service when we deactivate. And this is kind of another area where I felt like I wasn't like hacking Ember. I wasn't doing anything that was like going against the framework. I felt like me and the framework were sort of one here in like making this thing work. And it's one of those times where you just feel really like in the flow of developing and kind of a good feeling. So yeah, the next section here is testing the game in Ember. So I've heard that testing games is like near impossible, and that's probably true. I thought it was pretty hard to test my game. I think testing JavaScript in general, UI stuff, is kind of hard. But I knew I wanted to have tests because it's like you only have to have a project go on for like a week or two before like not having tests starts to bite you. So I was happy that Ember came built in with QUnit, Testums. So like I didn't have to set all this up from the beginning because then maybe I just never would have done it. And what was especially great was that the UI stuff is like the way I need to test that is the way I would test any Ember component. So what I have here is a test for my game menu component. And what I'm trying to test here is I just want to know that when I tap the audio off button, that it then toggles to say audio on and vice versa. And what was great about Ember is that when I generated this component, I already got a test like stub to where I can put my test. And I'm using just standard Ember testing processes to make this test happen. So that one I'm like, yes, thank you, Ember, for helping me there. And then maybe like a little bit more complex is that how do I know that the game is working at all? Like, it's great that the menu works, but how do I know that the game mechanics actually work? And in a game that's like more complicated than like pressing spacebar to jump over cat beds, maybe there's just no like good way to test this sort of thing. But for me, like this Croissant the Pizza Cat is a pretty simple game, and there's like one really simple game mechanic, and that's Croissant touches the pizza, she gets a point. And so I wanted to test that. I wanted to make sure that one game mechanic was working properly. So what I decided to do was create an acceptance test. And an acceptance test boots up your whole app. And then what I had it do was go to the first level, check that the score was 0, so get a baseline what the score is, wait 1 second, and then check that the score was greater than 0. And I figure if Croissant has a score greater than 0, that means she's touched a pizza and it all works. But if you saw the game when I was playing it, or maybe played it on your computer, there's no guarantee that the pizza will be at like Croissant level, or that she didn't run into a cat bed or something like that. So I needed to do something to make sure that Croissant would definitely touch a pizza. And that's what, in this code snippet, what the spewPizzasLikeCrazy test helper does. And so what it does is it turns the game from the thing on the left, so that's what the game looks like when you're playing it normally, to something on the right. So on the right there, Croissant moves a little bit faster, the pizzas are all at Croissant height, and there's no cat beds. And I think what's kind of cool about this is like one of those moments where you're like, I love being an Ember developer, I love being a JavaScript developer, because the test helper itself was just like a normal Ember test helper. So like that's something that Ember gave me. And the ability to be able to modify the game code like in line, like dynamically while the game was running, is a thing that JavaScript lets me do. So like this is one moment where I'm like, yes, this was like a fun way to make this game. Finally, I would like to chat a little bit about deploying the game in Ember. So as talked about before, I really wanted to get this on the web. I wanted this to be on mobile. I wanted this to be on desktop. But I didn't want to have to become an expert in all these systems. I didn't want to have to bother some mobile engineers or desktop, like OS X engineers or something like that to figure out how to do this. So fortunately, Ember, once again, kind of came to my aid. And if you were here last year, you saw that the community came around to decide that Ember CLI deploy is like the canonical way to deploy your Ember apps to the web. So I decided to go with that, and works really well. So I deployed this app to S3. What was great things about it were like at one point I made a mistake in the code, published that code, was able to revert the code, and like just all the things you would want to do on a robust like deploy process. So like thank you Ember CLI deploy. And then there's deploying to mobile and desktop. So I hope you got a chance to see Alex's and Felix's talks yesterday on building mobile apps and desktop apps, respectively, because they were really great, and they have a lot of tips on how you can use what you already know about Ember to put your stuff on these other platforms. So seeing that they were talking at the conference and seeing that they had ways to build like Ember apps in mobile and desktop, I looked into the things that they were doing, and I decided to try my hand at using Ember CLI Cordova to publish to the app stores and Ember Electron to build a desktop app. And I was really pleased that I was able to use Ember CLI Cordova to get Croissant the Pizza Cat onto the Apple App Store and to the Android App Store. So if you search for it, you'll find it on there. I think I have 0 reviews, so like, please, 5 stars if you can, everyone. And so Ember CLI Cordova worked out really well. And I was especially nervous about Android because I had never built an Android app. And I was just thinking, like, am I going to have to learn Android to be able to make this happen? And the answer was, not really. Like, I had to learn enough about how the IDE worked, but like really Ember CLI Cordova took care of the boring parts of getting the app set up. And same with Ember Electron. I had never built an OS X app from scratch before, and Ember Electron just kind of handled that for me. So it was sort of great. So if you want to download the Mac app, you can go to croissantthepizzacat.com. Thank you very much. Somebody got it? Yes, 5 stars, please remember. And download the game. So I just thought how awesome is this add-on ecosystem that I can focus on making the game, and all these things that would take forever to do, and I would have hated doing them, just get kind of, for the most part, handled for me. So the takeaways from this is that I think all apps, all JavaScript front-end apps, are going to have very similar things that they need. At least at some base level, there are things that they're going to need. And I think we should let Ember handle the boring parts. That might be a great thing for Ember to just do, all the stuff we don't want to spend our time doing. For me and this game, the main things were building the UI, dealing with the testing, where do we put the game logic, and then deploying the game itself. Here's a couple links. I learned a lot from Mozilla's developer network on building games in JavaScript. Really handy. The second link has a bunch of free tools to make game assets, which I also found handy. In case you want to know how I put these graphics together as kind of basic as they are, here's some apps that I used there. I have this Ziploc bag full of croissant stickers. So I can't take them all. I mean, I probably could take them all home, but please take them from me. So find me later. They look like that in the slide there. Croissant does have 2 colored eyes, but I was made aware that I got it backwards. Her green eye is actually her right eye, or whatever it is. Whatever I have on the slide it's wrong. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming to see this.